Hello and welcome to Sarah Zedig, live from her closet. Hello, my name is Sarah Zedig, and this is my closet. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about HBO's The Nevers.
I will cut your face to a mess.
You know, the touched.
Yes, they have weird deformities and afflictions.
So you might be thinking to yourself, what the fuck is The Nevers? The Nevers is an HBO television show that is sort of jokingly described as Victorian X-Men, which is because that's exactly what it is, which is not necessarily a bad idea. It's sort of derivative, it's sort of obvious, but I saw a trailer for it and I heard some buzz. And I thought, you know, maybe there might be something there. It could potentially be. I mean, it's 2021 and there's lots of women in the trailer. And I like women. As a woman, I'm a big fan of women. You know, maybe there's a chance. Maybe there's a possibility that this show is gonna do some really interesting things. My girlfriend came to visit me for a bit, and we decided, you know what, we need to watch something. Let's watch The Nevers. We knew absolutely nothing about it, besides the fact that it was a TV show that was Victorian X-Men. And as the first episode rolled on, we were like, okay, there's some annoying dialogue, there's some annoying bits, but when the characters get into a room and talk to each other, and they like actually have conversations the way human beings would in real life, then you start to get a feeling of, oh, this show actually has potential. These actors are really good. The writers are clearly capable of writing some really good dialogue exchanges. And then as things wore on, we were like, oh, there's some lesbian undertones with the relationship between Amalia True and Penance Irish accent.
That bird seemed awful keen on my ablutions.
And then there was some action that was sort of weird. There is an antagonist character who is like,
did you all come in hats? Now all of your brains are naked.
And that wasn't super awesome. But we still sort of came out thinking like, okay, this has potential. I'm feeling a little optimistic. And then the credits rolled and it said directed by Joss Whedon, and then written by Joss Whedon, and then produced by Joss Whedon. It was like a jump scare. It was genuinely like, oh my God, I feel unclean. I feel like I have been duped. It is just sort of true that Joss Whedon is bad and bad at his job. Really bad writer and a bad director and a bad producer and just sort of bad all over. He wrote some good dialogue in the 90s and that has been his career ever since. Hey, remember Buffy? Wow, I sure did hire a lot of really good writers to fix my awful writing sensibilities, huh? You should thank me for that. I'm really feminist. He's just awful. Have you seen The Avengers? That movie sucks. But we decided to keep watching because we did some research and we learned that in like November of 2020, Joss Whedon decided to step away from the show. I think I'm gonna talk about this a little bit more. I should say I don't have a plan for this video. We watched episode 6, the last episode at the time of recording. We watched episode 6 last night, and I have not been able to stop thinking about it. And I decided to record this video completely on a whim. So there are 12 episodes planned. They've released 6, and then there's a break because COVID-19 happened, and then they're going to release the next 6 episodes at an unknown future date. And the thing is, Joss Whedon stepped away from the show, and they basically elevated the women who were already on the writing team and hired a new showrunner in his place. So to my mind, it was like, okay, if Joss Whedon isn't going to be involved with this show anymore, at some point in the future, then maybe there's a chance that the good stuff that we like will rise to the top, and this show will become kind of what it feels like it could be or wants to be. So we decided to keep going with the show, and let me tell you, it has some ups and some downs. I'm going to be talking about spoilers for the Nevers from this point on, but I would suggest that you watch this video anyway, because the thing is, right, on the whole, I would say the Nevers is not very good in general. The 6 episodes that exist right now, it's not very good, but it has lots of really good bits. And I'm going to get to a way for you to watch this show that I think will make the experience a lot more pleasurable. Because I actually think literally the first 5 episodes of this television show are completely superfluous, but we'll get to that. So the basic premise of HBO's The Never, a Joss Whedon tale, it's Victorian London, and some interval of time ago, there was like a big alien ship or something that flew over London and dropped these spores onto people. And then everybody forgot that this happened. But all these spores landed on people, and everybody that it landed on gained superpowers. There's one guy, Augie, who can commune with birds. There's Penance, who can... she sees potential energy, and that lets her be able to build cars and weapons. One of my frustrations with this show is that it wants to be Victorian X-Men, right? But one of the most important things for you to do as a storyteller, telling a story about superheroes, is to lay out in very clear, precise terms the rules of the powers. Because if you have somebody who can just kind of do whatever, then that makes it really easy for you as a writer to just sort of say that they can get out of any situation and there's never any stakes and they're never really at risk, because you're not challenging yourself to have limitations. Penance's power is that she sees potential energy and she can manipulate it in some way, but we never see what that actually looks like from her perspective, and we don't really understand how it manifests exactly. So the result is that she can just she just gets to be I mean, the archetype that she is in this show is she's the engineer from Firefly. I can't remember that character's name, but she was my favorite character in Firefly. I really like Penance. I like the actress. I love an Irish accent. I really enjoy when she's on screen, and I really like the dynamic that she has with Amalia True, who is basically the show's protagonist, and we'll get to her in a second. But the problem is that her powers are ill-defined, and she doesn't really get much to do as a character. She's just sort of the person who comes up with gadgets. There are other characters, like there's a girl who's just really, really tall. There's a girl who speaks every single language basically simultaneously and doesn't know how to translate that back into English. There's a girl who can touch things and turn them into glass. But that was another situation where my girlfriend and I watching this were a little confused. It's set right in an orphanage. The idea is you have these people who are called the Touched, who are people who had these alien spores dropped on them and they developed all these superpowers. And Amalia True, the show's protagonist, is the sort of like caretaker of this orphanage where all of these people who have turns, is what they're called, come to have a refuge. There's clearly a narrative archetype going on here where you have this orphanage that is basically Xavier's school for extraordinary children, and it's operating in London, and these people are trying to find and rescue other people with turns, other touched, but they don't do the extremely obvious thing of having a let's establish everybody's powers montage. They don't go from person to person. Like, the obvious thing to do, they even have a perspective character, the girl who speaks a bunch of languages. They actually spend a pretty decent chunk of, I think, either the first or the second episode with her. She is like the perspective character, and she's brought into the orphanage and like given a tour. And there is a little bit of the sort of like power montage where we see other people, other touched, showing off their powers. But there's no sitting down and like explaining explicitly like, oh, that's this character. Everything she touches turns to glass. Our confusion was it looked like she turned things into ice. And there's a big difference between being Iceman and being able to freeze anything versus literally physically altering the atomic structure of a thing you are touching to turn it into glass. There's a very, very, very distinct rule set. And like, there's a lot of complicated differences between those two power sets, and they don't do enough to differentiate them. The idea of a character who can speak a bunch of different languages all at the same time is interesting, but on the whole, the idea of having this perspective character who can speak all these different languages is immediately difficult from a writing perspective because she's positioned as the character who is supposed to like ask really dumb, obvious questions. She's supposed to be like Elliot Page in Inception. His character in that film is like, wow, well, how do you do the dream drop distance? And Joseph Gordon-Levitt says, well, you plug in a USB cord into your brain, you download your consciousness, and then you do mescaline. They pick a character who literally can't ask those questions to be the person who is like the character we're following in our first real introduction to this orphanage that is supposed to be the home base of where everything is happening. It's sort of like a microcosm of a lot of this show's problems, where it's so much in a hurry to get to being a show with a mystery box and having a big mystery at its center that it completely disregards the responsibility that any show, any story has in its opening chapters to give the audience a reasonable set of expectations about the metaphysical reality that they are going to be spending time in, and like the rules that govern the people, the characters who exist in this narrative. And I'm not saying that we need to have like a whole 40-minute, let's establish every single character one by one rundown type thing. I just mean literally more effort than absolutely none at all. So in a broader context, what this show is about is there's a lot of men in government and in the aristocracy who are alarmed about the existence of the touched and how they might disrupt the order of power in Victorian London. And this is where you get to the sort of paradoxical quality of the Nevers, where it's marketed as Victorian X-Men, and you look at HBO's banner image for the Nevers, and it's all these women standing in a row, right? And you watch the trailers, and it's all these women punching and kicking and doing action stuff and driving cars through Victorian London. And then you watch the show, and all of the women, even when they're like well acted, they're very boring, because they don't have anything to do. And it took me a while. It really took me until episode 5 to really pinpoint why I felt so disinvested in basically all of the women. And it's because the orphanage has absolutely no relationship with Victorian London, and indeed the era in which this story is set. So the women come to this orphanage and live there, and then they never, I guess, have to interact with London anymore. And now it's like a super progressive place. So inside this orphanage, there's no racism, there's no sexism, there's no homophobia. It's just sort of like people, it feels very modern. And it's very out of place when you get to everything else that is like Regency drama that feels like it's right out of a Jane Austen book. Then the show starts getting really interesting because it's about characters discussing power dynamics and political strategy, and going over like what is acceptable for a child of the aristocracy to be seen doing. And all of that stuff involves male characters. So paradoxically, all of the most compelling characters in this show are the men. You have this one guy, he's like a really foppish, flamingly gay man who runs an underground sex club. The people who work there are touched. So it's the idea is like, oh, you're gonna go to this underground nightclub and get to have sex with a bunch of people with superpowers. Ooh. Which is actually like a really interesting idea for this setting. They're actually like really honest about material circumstances with that character and with a lot of the men, a lot of the characters who are caught up in the aristocracy, because they actually have things to worry about. And like that guy, the guy who runs that sex club, he gets to be the guy who will brush against the aristocracy and sort of make fun of everybody for being blue bloods and being, you know, foppish and weird. But at the end of the day, he still reaps the benefits of the privilege of himself being a member of the aristocracy. And there's actually an interesting moment in episode 5, which could have been much more interesting if that episode had been directed even remotely competently, where there's going to be a public hanging of a character and he's there to watch, and there's like a special stage for all of the aristocrats, but he wants to get out and mingle with the normies. So he like jumps the railing and goes into the crowd and mingles with them. And then later on, when there's a riot and the hanging goes awry, he like scrambles to get back up onto the stage where the aristocrats are. And that to me is like, oh, that's a really solid illustration of the sort of like class dynamics at play here. I wish the rest of the show was like that at all. There's another character, Augie, who is the son of the aristocratic woman who bankrolls the orphanage. I really like him because he's a closeted queer boy, very clearly. I think there's some egg energy there. I think you could put this boy in a dress and it would probably make him blush in a happy way. But what I really like about every scene that he's in is that he has a very realistically written and very relatable form of autism where he knows how to perform being an aristocrat, but as soon as you go off script, he has no idea what's happening. There's a great scene where he's talking to Penance, and there's a side character who has just been murdered, and Penance is trying to figure out who killed her, and she thinks that maybe Augie did it, and Augie thinks that they're talking about something completely different, and so he accidentally confesses to the murder of this character, and Penance is like,
oh, you are a monster, and you're gonna go to prison. I don't care how rich you are.
What's happening? What's happening? I don't know what's happening.
Wait, hold on. What are we? Please stop. Tell me what we're talking about right now, because I am so confused. I don't understand what's happening. And he does that several times throughout the show where he's just like, guys, please, is there a subtext that I'm missing here? I don't understand what we're talking about. It's so relatable. It's so good. It's such a good characterization because I know people who are like that. I'm like that sometimes. That element of the show is so interesting. And like, there's an old guy who's very much a Tywin Lannister type who isn't just a villain. He isn't just a bad guy. He is somebody who is like, we need to control the population and the touched are a threat, but we can't be seen as cracking down on them violently. We have to do this in a way that manipulates public perception. And it's just like really practical and honest in a way that feels like, okay, the writers of this show actually thought about what's going on at this particular moment in history. You can tell that a lot of the writers on the show have read like Regency novels. They've read Jane Austen. And then Joss Whedon comes in and he's like, hey, don't you think that this like 5'9" white woman who has like no muscles should like be able to beat up a bunch of dudes in a fist fight? Wouldn't it be cool if like everybody just got into fist fights and then we cut around completely nonsensically for 5 minutes and then the fight scene was over and they won? Wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't that be neat? And it like every time the show remembers that it's a Joss Whedon show and that it needs to have like big, dumb, stupid action, it just tanks. And there's the sort of main villain character whose name is Malady, and she's like a crazy person. But actually, when she gets time to say what's going through her head, like, there's actually something poetically beautiful about her. And like, her thing is like, her turn is that she turns pain into power. And that's another thing where her turn literally isn't defined, I don't think, until episode 5, despite the fact that she is a main antagonist throughout the rest of the show. And so it was unclear to us what her threat even was or what she was capable of. One of the weird issues with this show is that there are scenes where it seems like they're saying one thing, and then the show expects you to take a completely different message from it. So an example of this is Amalia True and the Tywin Lannister guy. They have a conversation where Amalia is basically asking about the same murder that Penance was asking Augie about. Amalia thinks that the Tywin Lannister guy probably did it, and they have this really interesting conversation about political systems.
If I am your killer revealed, behold, the lion, Great Britain.
It's genuinely like a really good back and forth where rather than just talking about like, did you kill Mary? Did you do this? It's a much more philosophical question. The Tywin Lannister guy does not say, I killed Mary. He doesn't even imply that he did so. He just is talking about systemic political theory in a really salient way. And then the next scene.
So he confessed without confessing.
It was honestly impressive.
My girlfriend and I both just looked at each other like, wait, what? Is that what was that the message of that scene? That's not what I took from that at all. And then the show just operates on the assumption from that point forward that yes, the government just did that and he hired the person to do it. So they set up this mystery and then they answer the mystery in the subtext of a conversation that seems to be saying something completely different from what they want the conversation to be saying. I am in the mode of attributing this to Joss Whedon because I want this show to recover from his influence and get better. But it really does feel like when Joss Whedon gets in, it's like the show starts working against itself in a really big, noticeable, like scientifically measurable way. In episode 5, Malady, this terrorist who has killed a bunch of people and has been trying to like, she's a sort of like the Joker of this world. But again, her political motivations are left pretty ill-defined. I mean, look, this is an HBO show. It's very liberal. Of course, there isn't an actual, honest, earnest reckoning with class dynamics in the sense of material political reality. It gets close on occasion, but in a general sense, it falls into the trope that a lot of these types of stories do of, oh, this villain is just crazy and she has no actual motivations. She's just doing it for whatever. And they start to gesture at her more interesting motivations because she thinks that like God is speaking to her through pain. And she's trying to get other people to see God through pain. And there's the way, like the actress really sells it in a way that is quite good. But from a writing perspective, it just doesn't add up. There's also an American guy who is a scientist who is just evil. All he does is he does lobotomies on the touched and he turns them into slaves to dig up this big blue blob in the ceiling that is implied to be and then eventually confirmed to be the ship that crashed and gave everybody superpowers. And he's working with the woman who is bankrolling the orphanage. This woman character is immediately made way less interesting because she has this villainous side that doesn't make sense and seems to completely contradict everything else that she believes. And it's just because the show needs intrigue. It needs a mystery box. There's actually there's two separate strains of mindless soldiers where there are the touched who have been modified, like they've been given lobotomies so that they can't use their powers and they just follow orders and they're just used for manual labor to dig up this underground area. And then there are also like cybernetic super soldiers or something. They're like steampunk super soldiers that have half their faces missing or whatever. I don't know what the fuck was up with them. That was garbage nonsense. You just get into a fist fight with them. They're just mindless, faceless monsters to fight when you need to throw some monsters at somebody to give them something to fight. And it sucks. Every single time it happens, it sucks. I wish that we could just have television about adult human women and people and not have to have this like root element of it needs to be an action show where people do punching and kicking. I'm sick of punching and kicking. This is Victorian London. You don't make a show set in Victorian London clearly inspired by Jane Austen books and then fucking make them all do punches and kicks. The whole, like, half of the intrigue and the interest of the drama of the stories that are from that era is the fact that these are people who don't have a whole lot of personal strength, and so they are working within the confines of a system that they cannot escape, and how they exist and find love and flourish within that system is where the drama comes from. So when you just do people doing punches and kicks and having superpowers, it just sort of like robs the whole thing of so much of its potential. And I'm not even saying like, I'm not saying that it should be devoid of action scenes altogether, because again, the conceit, this is Victorian X-Men, I'm expecting some level of action, but I'm also expecting, since this is supposed to be Victorian London, that the people here are actually like still bound by the rules of real life. So anyway, basically every episode I came really, really close to saying, I'm done with this show. I'm done with this show. We both were like, the show it just keeps making these really dumb, stupid decisions where it's dedicated to building up towards this big, dumb, stupid mystery box. We were both just like, I'm so close to just giving up on this. But when it's good, it is really good. Like, there are men who are talking to each other, and there's really good homosexual tension between them. And there's women who are talking to each other, and there's very clear, like, sapphic love between them. It's just, it's delectable. And then you get to the big dumb mystery box bullshit, and it distracts from everything. And then they do these awful writing choices. Episode 5, I think, is like a masterclass in everything that you could possibly do wrong making an episode of television. There are, I think, genuinely 3 separate groups of people in episode 5 who are all trying to do a secret plot around the hanging of Malady, where you have Penance, who wants to break Malady out of jail. You have some other third party who is doing something that involves electrocuting a bunch of people. And then there's the Tywin Lannister guy who has gone to this character named the Beggar King, who's played by Nick Frost, which is really weird to see him again. And he's all right, basically saying, like, you should give us some chaos. Give us some riots or whatever. So there's 3 separate groups that have plans that are all happening simultaneously. And we're not inside any of them. Even the ones with our main characters, where we see, like, Penance builds a model of the area where they're gonna do the hanging, and she's standing there with all of the characters, and she's like, well, this is where we need you, and this is where, but they don't actually show you what they're doing. And this is a common thing, right? Like, this is a way that a lot of shows and movies and stuff will depict, like, a heist or whatever, where they won't lay out all the specifics. There's a way to write that that's good, obviously. But the problem here is that when we don't know what we're expecting to happen, when things go wrong, we don't necessarily know that they're going wrong. And this compounds with the fact that I genuinely don't know who is on Malady's side. And we haven't established who those characters are really very well, or what their power set is, or anything. So there's a character who can just say that he is anybody, and people will believe him. And that's interesting. But I know he must have been in the show before, but I was just so completely lost, because I thought he was somehow involved with Penance's plot. And then it turned out that he was doing the thing with the electricity to shock a bunch of people, and they were actually faking Melody's death. And Melody was actually pretending to be a reporter the whole time. They literally do the Kaiser Soze thing where there's a detective character who has been trying to figure out who this murderer is. There's like a death of a woman that doesn't make any sense that he's wanting to pin on Melody. And it turns out it is the reporter that he has been talking to that Melody is impersonating. And then there's also a woman that looks just like Melody that dies in her place. And it's literally like the way that it's shot and the way that it has like flashbacks and like piecing it together. It's literally like the end of The Usual Suspects, and it's a Kaiser Soze moment. It's very obvious and dumb, and like it's just like you had no chance to figure this out. It's completely out of the blue. Like, that's happening. And then there's the, we're gonna hire the Beggar King's men to cause chaos in Victorian London, and all they do is light some things on fire at the end of the episode, and then they run around screaming, and that's supposed to say they incited a riot, I guess? And then there's the actual riot that happens, which is just so bafflingly depicted, because they even make a point of having the Tywin Lannister character look at the crowd of people that are gathered for Melody's execution and say, crowd's a bit thin. And then all of the drama after the electrocution thing happens comes from them being trampled and stampeded. When it's like there's only been like 40 or 50 people in this square. It genuinely just doesn't make sense. Like, it doesn't. I just don't see these things happening the way that the show is insisting that they would happen. My girlfriend and I were both very confused, and we had to like commiserate afterwards to understand what even happened in that episode. There is, on paper, an interesting thing happening where you have this intersection of different plans. But because we're not inside any of them, we have no frame of reference for whether things are going right or wrong, or what's really happening or what's not happening. And it's all because every scene that even is good of characters like discussing what they want to do ends too early. It ends before they actually talk about what they're gonna do, which is such a television thing to do, and it's so cheap. It's just a lazy way of getting the audience to be invested in like, oh, what are they gonna do? I have no idea. And if they actually had some fucking confidence, they would have the characters say their plan and then show the plan in action and then show it go wrong, and that would be good. Because then you have stakes, then you have motivation, then you understand what's actually happening. And the show is so fucking frustrating when it gets so far up its own ass about this stuff. It just sucks. So anyway, we were watching the show last night, and we were like, I don't know, man. I don't know. Let's watch the last episode. Let's just go ahead and watch the last episode and see how the first half of the first season ends. And, buddy, Episode 6 is great. Episode 6 is unbelievably like S-tier television. Just start to finish, absolutely incredible. It has like a dumb, stupid fight scene that it doesn't need towards the end, but like the first 30 minutes, man. Oh my God. So, okay, Amalia True, right? She is the show's protagonist. And her power, her turn, is that she randomly has flashes of the future. So she'll be in the middle of a conversation, and then suddenly she'll remember something happening to her in the future, or like she'll physically experience it, but it's only for a second. So like for a second, she'll be in the middle of a fist fight with somebody, and then she'll be back in the present, and she's like, oh, well, I guess I'm gonna go to that person's house and get into a fight with him. There's sort of like this weird implication that maybe she's from the future. Like she was left, she is somebody who has actually kind of knows what's happening, because she's clearly connected to the ship that was flying in and dropped the spores on everybody. And they actually do a really frustrating thing where there are a couple of times where she does tell characters in the show her story, but it happens off screen, where they do the same thing of Amalia looking at Penance and saying, all right, it's time for me to tell you my story. And then it cuts away. And then it cuts back and Penance is like, wow, that was a fucked up story. Huh, wow, okay. And that's just cheap. Like, that just sucks. That's just bad writing. That's just lazy. That sucks. That's bad. That's lame. And the thing is that the rest of the show is made so much better by the existence of episode 6. So episode 6 comes around and it's set in the future, like way in the future. And it's set in a future that is similar but very different. And it's like a post-apocalyptic future. It's got kind of a Terminator vibe. There is this just incredibly dykey, like older woman who is like a really cool soldier type. And it turns out that she is Amalia, basically. Like she has this, it's a different actress, but she has the same physical tics. My girlfriend actually noticed this before me. It is this wild bit of speculative fiction where there's these aliens called Galanthi that have come to Earth and they've given people superpower. Well, they haven't given people superpowers. In the future, when they show up and they drop spores on people, what they're doing is they're making people more empathetic and more like willing to work together, and they want to work with the Galanthi. And so there's like this religious sect that is very against the Galanthi, and then there's this other sect that is more like a global military operation or something. They call themselves a peace coalition. I don't trust like that. But they find this one Galanthi that is in a pit in this place that was being researched, and I guess some guys that were from the religious sect came in there and they killed the science team that was researching the Galanthi, and they hung them up above the pit where the Galanthi lives.
It's basic torture protocol. You always do the family first.
And the Galanthi has a portal that is open, that is getting ready to go through to like escape from this reality. And there's a big argument about whether it's just going to run away or whether it's going to go for reinforcements. And they have this belief that the Galanthi have the ability to fix whatever is wrong with the world. And there's the implication that the world has become uninhabitable. What makes this sequence good? Like when it started, my eyes were rolling because it felt like very Terminator and very like, okay, oh God, here we go. But when it starts going, when they get inside and we get these characters interacting, suddenly it starts getting really sapphic because there's this older woman and then there's this other character who's a woman who's like a medic, and the older woman character, like they go inside and they find there's like a greenhouse inside this facility that they're in, and there's all these tomatoes. Tomatoes are a very lesbian fruit. If you think about it, it's like, okay, these two, they're fucking right now is what they're doing. This is what's happening. And they have like all these philosophical conversations, and the older woman tries to steal morphine from her. And then there's an earthquake. The medic character gets shot tragically and dies. And then the older woman decides like, you know what? I'm done. Fuck this. She just like drinks 2 bottles of like just straight up poison. And I love this shot because it really is just like what no pussy does to a motherfucker. It's very sad and very serious. So that's, don't. But anyway, as she's dying, the Galanthi is like flying up and it like reaches through the wall in energy form and like touches her. And this episode is framed very differently than every other episode, where it opens with chapter 1, and I can't remember what the title of it is, but it's set in 4 chapters, which no other episode does. And it actually really works in this episode. So chapter 2 is about Molly, and it's this woman who is the same actress who plays Amalia, but she is like a baker, and it shows basically the course of her life. She gets married, she has a couple of miscarriages, and her husband dies, and she finds out that the boy that she had a crush on when she was younger is married to another woman and has a kid.
God makes his plans, so here we are.
They really take their time with this. But she decides to commit suicide, and she commits suicide at the same moment that the Galanthi shows up. We then see her grabbed out of the water and like thrown into a mental institution. And now the consciousness of the older woman from the future is in Molly's body.
Hey, this is Sam. It's gotta be free life tech because your temporal sequencing's fucked.
And it's great. It's really good. And it's like the 30-minute mark by the time that you get to, okay, so now I know what's happening. For a show to be willing to go go 30 minutes and let these two settings actually live and breathe, fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I actually paused at this moment with tears in my eyes because it was really good, really tragic, very honest. Like, it's depressing and it's women committing suicide, but it's not just like, oh, I'm sad, I'm gonna kill myself. They actually really sell the desperation and the ways that the world itself can just drive you to utter hopelessness by death by 1,000 cuts. And the simultaneity, the circumstantial simultaneity of their suicides, bringing them together into one body through this Galanthe is like, it's beautiful. And just everything about it was just so good. And I was crying and I had to pause the show. And I said to my girlfriend, I hate when this show is good because it's gonna get bad again and it's gonna rip my fucking heart out. And then the show kept being good. The episode 6 is fantastic. Like, just genuinely just great. It's just good. It's just good television. Just excellent, excellent television. Here's the thing. I think that if you want to watch The Nevers, if anything about this, if any of the good qualities that I have mentioned make you think that maybe it's something that you want to watch, my recommendation, and this is not a joke, this is not a gag, I'm not going, big galaxy brain silliness for the sake of it. I genuinely think the best way to watch this show is to watch episode 6 first, and then you watch the rest of the show, and now all of the dumb mystery box bullshit is completely explained. You have Amalia's motivation that she's actually a woman in the future who is trapped in the body of somebody from the past, and she's had to teach herself how to live as a woman in Victorian London.
What to do, what to do, what to do.
And that makes every scene with her that much more interesting, where before it was like sort of frustrating to watch the show because I didn't really understand Amalia as a character. Alternatively, you could just watch episode 6 and then not watch anything else. Episode 6 is genuinely just stellar, stellar, stellar television. Like, I think on its own already, it is just a good bit of speculative fiction that is really interesting. And it doesn't have Joss Whedon's involvement at all. It's actually a really funny sort of double-blind experiment where we didn't know who directed episode 5, and it was a complete mess, and we hated it, and it was directed by Joss Whedon. And then we didn't know who directed episode 6, and it was gorgeous and beautiful and incredibly sapphic. We got through that episode, and it wasn't directed by Joss Whedon, and it was great. Amalia describes Penance as her heart.
I left Penance because you said, find me. I left my heart to come talk to you. Talk to me!
And then she tells Penance her true name, which they set up as being a thing that never happens in the future, because if you telling somebody your true name is like giving them power over you. So she tells Penance her true name, and it's so like, it's so gay. It's so beautifully transcendently gay. If they don't kiss in this show, I'm gonna be very mad. The unfortunate thing is that, looking at the timeline based on the Wikipedia, so Joss Whedon announced that he was walking away from the show like late November of 2020, and the production paused due to the coronavirus, but then it resumed, and they filmed episodes 6 through 12 in the fall of 2020, and they say that filming ended in October. So unfortunately, it does seem like there's a pretty high chance that Joss Whedon was still involved with the show for the next 6 episodes. However, they did film episode 6 in that chunk of time, and episode 6 is incredible, and it has nothing to do with Joss Whedon. I have a theory that Joss Whedon did not, in fact, step away from the show. I think he was pressured. I think, because the call-outs that happened to him recently happened in like February of 2021, I have a suspicion that HBO knew where the wind was blowing in terms of like Joss Whedon's respectability, because even when the show was like advertised, they never mentioned his name, which is how we watched the trailer and we didn't know that Joss Whedon was involved. I think that he was pushed out of the show and they gave him the option to say, oh, I'm going to step away because I'm tired and COVID-19 it's been so hard having to work during COVID-19. I have hope that the next 6 episodes will be less Joss Whedon and more whatever episode 6 was. I can't, at this moment in time, wholeheartedly recommend that you, dear viewer, watch HBO's The Nevers, because, like I said, I think pretty much it's just sort of like meh. It's all right most of the time. When it's good, it's really, really good. And I think if you want like a good hour of television that is just like a weird speculative sci-fi story that also has a period drama crammed in there, watch episode 6 and then don't watch anything else. I do think if the show without Joss Whedon is able to pull the pieces together and make the things that work even better and be what the show is actually about, this could turn into an incredible, incredible show. And there's actually a really good chance because episode 6 basically puts the mystery box bullshit to bed. And it introduces some like new mystery stuff of like maybe there being another person from the future who wound up in the past. But honestly, like I'm okay with that because we do need to expand the scope and there needs to be more stuff going on. But it does feel like there is an opportunity now, as far as the plot is concerned, to let the characters just sort of be themselves in this universe and actually tell stories about power and inequity and have these characters exist in an actual material context. That's the hope, anyway. That's the dream, that a future without Joss Whedon. Anyway, that's been my video about The Nevers. I expected this to last 20 minutes, and instead it's an entire whole ass hour. Maybe less when I edit it, but I don't think it will be. Oops, sorry. I would like to thank my $10 a month patrons at Sheldy Chambler, 12 Tone, Anarcho Duck, Anaphylaxis, Athiet, Austin McCauley, Bobby Jane DeForge, Brianna Bergen, Cam Chacon, Cayenne Shepherd, Cleaver Bacon, Blake, Cynthia Darling, Dick Beninia, Emma Sylvia, Faye, Gary Marshall, Helena Bravelli, Hilda Mangold, Innate Optimist, JB Silbinary Wolf, Jay Jorts, Jennifer Palmer, J Mac D, June Circuit, Catherine Jibes, L something something, Mad Figs, Marcus Kitzinger, Swoosha Cube, Monochromatic Pineapple, Mountain Snow, Natalie Watts, Not Sam, Patrick Feeney, Paz the Radical Wicked Witch, Quirk, Richard Dunbeck, Robert Cutts, Robin, Scott Olson, Susie Miniike, Set, Z, and Zavak. Apologies for the car noise, there's not really much I can do about it. I wanted to say a couple of quick things. The Matrix sequels are good, actually. My nearly 2-hour-long collaboration video with Eric Sophia McAllister over on the YouTube channel Curio is up for everyone, and you can find that over on their channel. Thank you to Molly Noise for doing the credit music for this video. You can find the links to all of her stuff in the description. And thank you to all of my patrons who have been so patient with me. I have a lot of stuff planned that I'm working on now that I'm medicated again. As always, you can support my stuff at patreon.com/LTAS. You can follow me on Twitter at HMSNoFun for further updates about what I'm up to. And yeah, there you go. That is this. I'm also working on my Homestuck fanfiction called God Feels, which is a weird thing, I feel like, for a video essayist on this website to advertise, but I'm advertising it. GF3 is turning into like this big epic space opera with a lot of original characters that has very little to do with Homestuck proper in a general sense, and I'm putting a lot of time and effort into the future of this story. I did a Patreon post about it fairly recently, actually. It continues to be this really exciting project that I am physically incapable and legally unable to monetize in any way at all. And it takes all my energy away from doing this, which is the thing that I actually get paid to do. So that's sure is a way to be. There's, what else? Is there other stuff? Wow, I haven't done this in a while. Oh boy, it's been a minute. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I'll be back soon, I promise. I'm working on getting back to doing things. I might do this more often where I'm just in my closet, because the fact is that I just don't have access to the kind of setup where I can record against a backdrop. I've been smoking a lot of weed since I got to Seattle.